Right then, Hollywood loves selling you the story of its golden age. Grand. The real story is how the whole rotten empire came crashing down. Come here to me, and I'll tell you about the film that acted as its big, gaudy, multi-million-dollar funeral, the 1967 disaster, Camelot, and the absolute hames they made of it. Now, to understand the absolute state of Camelot, you have to understand the 1960s. Hollywood was splitting in two. On one side, you had the revolution, flower power, fast cars, new ideas, Bonnie and Clyde kicking down the door, the graduates sneering at the all lads. And on the other side, you had the dinosaurs. The old gods, the studio moguls, were still roaming the earth. They were bleeding out, mind you, but they were still massive. And they didn't understand what was happening. They looked at the long hair and the protests and the rock and roll and they just got confused. Their response to a revolution wasn't to join it, it was to build something so big and so expensive and so old-fashioned that it would just blot out the sun. And the king of these dinosaurs was one man, Jack Warner. He was the last of the original movie moguls, a fella who ran Warner Brothers studio like his own personal kingdom. And in 1964, Jack had pulled off the impossible. He'd taken the My Fair Lady and turned it into the biggest film of the year. Oh, it was a gamble. He paid a record-breaking $5.5 million just for the rights. He cast Audrey Hepburn, who couldn't sing a note, over the show's star Julie Andrews. The papers had a field day, but Jack won. The film was a colossus. 8 Oscars, a box office of $72 million on a $17 million budget. It saved the studio. Jack looked like a genius, and when a fella with notions about himself gets that lucky once, what does he do? He tries to catch lightning in a bottle twice. So, the studio starts looking around. The same fellas who wrote My Fair Lady, Lerner and Lova, they had another smash hit, a musical about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Camelot. It had been a hit on Broadway with Richard Burton and, wouldn't you know it, Julie Andrews. On paper, you couldn't fault it. It was the perfect plan. The exact same plan. Get the rights to the prestige musical, get the same creative team, spend a fortune, get a massive star. What could possibly go wrong? This yoke was meant to be a masterpiece. The next My Fair Lady. The next Gone with the Wind. Jack Warner, now pushing 70, saw it as his final, glorious monument. His big exit. He was looking to sell the studio, and this film would be his golden parachute. So, the checkbook came out. The budget was set at $15 million. That's $15 million in 1966 money. That's a budget big enough to choke a donkey. It was one of the most expensive films ever conceived. The plan was perfect. All they needed were the stars. And this, lads, is where the wheels start to come off. First they go for the original cast, Richard Burton. He'd done it on stage. He was the biggest star in the world. But Burton wanted $1 million and 10% of the gross. Warner nearly had a conniption. Burton was out. So who's next? Well, they need an Arthur, a king, someone with gravitas. They go to Cary Grant, he just laughs at them. They go to Rock Hudson, he says no, they are getting desperate. Finally, they land on an Irish actor, a fella named Richard Harris. Now, Harris wasn't a singer, at all. He was known for being intense and for being, well, a legendary head the ball, a drinker, a brawler, a fella who was, let's say, difficult, but he had a certain rugged charm. And more importantly, he'd work cheap, cheaper than Burton. Anyway, right. King Arthur, sorted. Now, Guinevere, the queen, this has to be Julie Andrews, right? The star of My Fair Lady on stage, the star of Mary Poppins and the Sound of Music on screen, the biggest female star on the planet. Jack Warner hadn't cast her in My Fair Lady, and he wasn't about to admit he was wrong now. Instead, he casts Vanessa Redgrave. Now, Redgrave was a brilliant actress, a stage legend, but again, not a singer. She was also famously a very vocal political activist, which made the old school studio brass very, very nervous. And for Lancelot, the handsome, pure of heart French knight, they cast an Italian fella named Franco Nero, who could barely speak English and definitely couldn't sing. He was only cast because the director's wife saw him in a film and thought he was handsome. So let's review the perfect plan. The studio is on its last legs. It's betting the entire farm on a historical epic, so grand it simply can't fail. It's a musical. And they've cast 3 leads, none of whom can sing. A perfect recipe for success. And I'm the Pope. The whole circus packs up and moves to Spain to film the happy land of Camelot, and from day one it is an absolute unmitigated circus, a dog's dinner of the highest order. First, the director, a fella named Joshua Logan. Now, Logan had directed South Pacific. He was an old school guy. He was not by any stretch part of the new Hollywood, he was part of the old, confused and slightly panicked Hollywoods, and Logan had notions. He had this idea that Camelot shouldn't look real, it should look magical. How do you make a film look magical, you ask? Well, if you're Joshua Logan, you smear Vaseline on the camera lens. I am not joking. He'd also shoot through bits of gauze and use these mad heavy colour filters. The result? The film doesn't look magical. It looks like you're watching it through a cataract. It's blurry, it's smeared, and the colours are so bright they could burn a hole in your retina. The magic hour wasn't just an hour. Logan tried to make the entire film look like a sunset, and it just ended up looking like a damp psychedelic watercolour. An absolute hames. But the blurry camera was the least of their problems. The real problem was the talent. You've got Richard Harris as King Arthur, acting de maggot from the moment he steps off the plane. Harris was a notorious hellraiser. He saw the production as a bit of a laugh. He'd show up late, he'd be tired from the night before, he'd argue with Logan about everything. Harris decided his Arthur wasn't a king, he was a philosopher. A peasant. He refused to wear the big kingly costumes, so they had to make him all these itchy, woolly, peasanty outfits. He's the King of England, and he looks like he's just wandered in from shearing a sheep. He also, let's not forget, could not sing. So he didn't sing. He talked the songs in a thick limerick accent. It was a choice. Then you had Lancelot and Guinevere, Franco, Nero, and Vanessa Redgrave. Now Nero arrives on set, this handsome Italian fella, and he's supposed to be the greatest knight in the world. He's given his lines phonetically. He has no idea what he's saying. He just says the sounds. And his singing voice was so bad they had to get someone else to sing for him, and it's one of the worst dubbing jobs in history. You can practically see the other fella in the corner of the frame with a microphone, but he and Redgrave, they take one look at each other and stop the lights. They begin one of the most famous, most public love affairs in Hollywood history, right there, on set, in full costume. This was complicated. For starters, Redgrave was married at the time to a director who was not Franco Nero, and Nero had a girlfriend. This wasn't just a bit of divilment, this was front-page tabloid news. The Vatican denounced the film because of their carry-on. So you have the director, who's away with the fairies, smearing goo on his camera. You have the lead actor, ahead the ball, who thinks he's a farmer. And you have the other 2 leads who are too busy fogging up the camera to remember their lines. It is pure, unadulterated chaos. And then, the weather. They're in Spain. It's supposed to be sunny. It rains, and rains, and rains. For weeks. The massive, expensive sets the entire castle of Camelot they'd built from scratch are sinking into a sea of mud. The costumes, which were made of real heavy wool and chainmail, get soaked. They weigh a ton. The actors can barely move. Richard Harris later said, "We were all stuck in this bloody mud. It was freezing. The costumes stank. It was the most miserable I've ever been in my life." The studio is back in Hollywood, absolutely panicking. The film is months behind schedule. The 15 million budget is gone. Just evaporated. They're now pushing 18 million. Warner is getting reports from the set that his director is a certified idiot, his star is a drunk, and his romantic leads are committing mortal sins on studio time. They finally finish shooting and get it into the editing room, and the first cut is 4.5 hours long. 4.5 hours. It's a soggy, blurry, out-of-tune mess. Logan is forced to cut it down. He hacks out songs, entire subplots. He slices it down to 3 hours. It still makes no sense. The story is gone. The magic is just gone. The suits at Warner Brothers watch the final cut, and the blood drains from their faces. They know they don't have My Fair Lady. They have a $18 million monument to pure Egyptry, but what can they do? They can't burn it. They've spent all the money. They have to release it. So they polish this yoke, and they plan the biggest, most expensive premiere you've ever seen. They're gonna force people to love it. They book the biggest cinemas for a roadshow release, long film, intermission, reserved seats. Just like My Fair Lady, they were trying to sell a fur coat in the middle of the desert. Because they had forgotten one tiny, insignificant detail. The year. It was 1967, the summer of love. And the audience. The audience had moved on. The film premieres in October 1967, and it is a bloodbath. The critics were not kind. They didn't just dislike it, they took a savage, gleeful pleasure in tearing it to pieces. Pauline Kael, the most feared critic in America, wrote a review that should be in a museum. She called it an epic disaster. She said, "The sets and costumes are a staggering display of extravagant, vulgar, bad taste. It's a movie in which the torches cast shadows on the sky." Another critic said, "Richard Harris's singing is an act of heroic self-sacrifice. The public, the kids who were listening to The Doors and Jimi Hendrix, they took one look at this 3-hour film about fellas in tin suits talk singing about chivalry, and they just went to see The Graduate instead. Or, even worse for Warner Brothers, they went to see Bonnie and Clyde." Now here's the real kicker. While Jack Warner was in Spain pouring millions of dollars into the Camelot mud pit, he'd also, almost by accident, given a couple of $1,000,000 to a young fella named Warren Beatty for a violent, sexy little gangster film. Warner hated Bonnie and Clyde. He thought it was filth. He thought it would be a flop. Bonnie and Clyde comes out 2 months before Camelot. It costs $2.5 million. It makes $70 million. It changes everything. Camelot costs $18 million. It barely makes back $12 million. It is a financial black hole. It almost sinks the studio. So what killed the film? Was it Harris's ego? Was it Logan being an Egypt with the Vaseline? Was it the rain? A few bad apples. Not a bit of it. The studio was a rotten ship, and this film was the iceberg. Camelot wasn't a film. It was a war against common sense. It was the last gasp of an empire that didn't know it was already dead. It was a monument to the arrogance of one man, Jack Warner, who thought he could just order up a masterpiece the way you order a sandwich. He was so busy trying to remake My Fair Lady that he didn't even notice the world had changed. He didn't notice that the very audience he was making it for was gone. 6 weeks after Camelot bombed at its premiere, Jack Warner finally sold the studio. It was the end of an era. The last mogul was out. The golden age was over, and this blurry, expensive, 3-hour musical was its eulogy. As me Allfella used to say, a nod is as good as a wink to a blind horse. The signs were everywhere. The horse was blind, and the whole rotten stable came crashing down. So now you know the real story of Camelot. Not the legend, not the magic, just the dirt from the cutting room floor. Right, I'm off. Slán cha.